Good afternoon, and welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton, and I'll be your host over the course of the next half hour. Today's episode focuses on the events of the recent Coal Symposium we hosted at the Charleston Civic Center. We heard from various government officials and industry insiders covering topics focused on the future of coal production in our state and throughout the world. The speakers included Senator Joe Manchin, Senator Shelley Moore Capito, West Virginia's Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, Representative Evan Jenkins, State Senate President Mitch Carmichael, and his counterpart over in the House of Delegates, Speaker Tim Armstead. They were joined by a host of industry presenters that focused on current topics and current events going on within the industry. All of these speakers covered multiple topics ranging from the future of coal to protecting miners and from helping coal to rebound in the United States using more coal mining to extract rare earth elements. These speakers provide excellent insight into where we are with energy production today, as well as energy production over the next 5-15 years and the challenges that the industry faces.
First of all, the Miners Protection Act. Basically, it's promised in 1946. It's been a promise we've kept since 1946. Harry Truman, working with John L. Lewis and the Krug Amendment, and now it's on life support, if you will, because of the crash and all the bankruptcies and on and on and on. And we're trying to fix this and basically shore it up with abandoned mine land money, excess, not the money that we need to take care of our reclamation problems that we have. This is excess money that's there. It's not being used. It makes it just all the sense in the world to fix something with the money that came from coal mining and not from taxpayers. So that's what we're trying to do. We've been working with the Republicans and with Senator Mitch McConnell. If Senator McConnell puts the bill up, we pass it tomorrow. We have enough bipartisan support. I've got every Democrat going to vote for it, and we got 15, Shelley's working with me very closely. We got 15, 16, 17 Republicans. It'll pass. But I don't think that they're going to let it go in entirety. I think that we'll definitely get the health care protection permanently fixed, and then we'll have to go back and get another bite. I love to do both of them. I'm trying to do both of them. But in reality, we'll probably get at least the health care and then take the pensions next year. Here's what's awful. It's been the 4-month extensions they've been doing. And I tried to explain to Senator McConnell. I said, first of all, you have to give a 90-day notice if you're going to have your health care benefits terminated. So if you give them a 4-month extension, after the first 30 days of the first month, you notify them they're going to lose it in 3. You get another 4 months, the same thing happens. Well, to a widow, a lot of the older people and a lot of widows, that putting that type of undue pressure, it's just inhumane. And I said, we're not helping anybody. We can fix this. Let's fix it. So I think that's going to be done. Well, the future coal, basically, not just me hoping and wishing that we're going to continue. The our National Department of Energy basically has predicted that coal is going to be a major mix of the market through 2040. So it's another 20 plus years. And if that's the case, then we can do it with new technology. The rest of the world is going to be burning it and depending on it much longer. And with that being done, we can create whole other industries by developing, research and developing as far as the new technologies to make sure that we take the carbon out also. We've taken out SOx and NOx and mercury. Now we take the carbon out, and it's going to be an industry that we can basically ship around the world. So there's definitely going to stabilize. We've gone through a horrible low, lower than I've ever seen. So it's going to stabilize and get much better, I believe. And I think for the sake of the country, it has to. Right now there's 52 Republicans in the United States Senate. There's 48 Democrats. So to get anything done, you're either going to need 12 Republicans voting with 48 Democrats, or you're going to need 8 Democrats voting with 52 Republicans. I'm always looking for that middle. I want to be one of the 12, one of the 8, whatever it takes. You follow me? To make it work. Or we're looking for one of the 12 to come over and help us. But I've always had hope. Sometimes it gets a little daunting. The United States is still the hope of the world. No matter what you think of this country, how bad things may be, how difficult or sometimes unfair you think they are, there's people coming from all over the world wanting to get here because this is the hope of the world. And I've said I've had a lot of meetings in my life since I've been in public service, especially in Washington. I've had meetings, secured meetings about terrorists, about immigrants coming, and basically people wanting to do harm for whatever reason, people wanting to come for the right reason. But I've never had a meeting yet tell me why people wanted to leave. So that tells me everything. We have the best country. We have the rule of law. We have the Constitution. And we should treat everybody fairly and equally. And there should be a proper pathway forward. That's what has to be done.
Well, there are thousands of miners in the state and in the area that were promised health benefits, lifetime health benefits. And because of bankruptcies of coal companies, that promise hasn't been fulfilled. We're going to fulfill that promise in Congress. It was a promise made back in the 40s, and it's very troublesome to me that we haven't been able to fulfill that promise for those miners, but we're going to do that and take care of their health and hopefully their pensions as well. Well, I was there for the president's signing of the repeal of the Stream Protection Act, and there were some miners there. And after the signing, he very graciously invited them into the Oval Office and us with them. So we got some really nice pictures. It's a thrill to be in the Oval Office. I've only been there maybe once or twice over my service, so I know it was a memory maker for them.
You know, you can feel it in the room. I've been here many, many years, and this year there's a sense of optimism. A lot of it is that elections matter. What a difference a year makes. What a difference an election makes. So there's a sense, and we see it in the market, we see it in the number of coal mines getting operating again, getting people back to work. And we're doing our part up in Washington. We passed the Johnson-Jenkins-McKinley piece of legislation that put the death knell into Obama's last job-killing regulation. It's called the Stream Buffer Zone Rule. It would have put 1/3 of all the coal miners in America out of work if allowed to stay on the books. We passed a bill, introduced on Monday, passed on Wednesday in the House, passed the Senate on Thursday, and I was in the Oval Office for the President to sign the Johnson-Jenkins-McKinley legislation that's going to save 1/3 of all the coal jobs. So there's real sense of optimism. But we're also looking to the future, the idea that coal, not only for power generation or steel production, there are other uses for coal. And we're investing in Washington. I'm actually adding money in the federal budget for the research and development of uses of coal. Look at rare earth elements. China right now has the market on these elements that are critical to our everyday smartphones or LCDs. Well, guess what? Coal ash has been identified as being an abundant source of these critically, desperately needed rare earth elements. So there are exciting opportunities for coal, both from a power and steel production like we have been so used to, but we also have opportunities in new ways that really we had never thought of. But we also need to make sure we're protecting our coal miners. The Miner Protection Act, to make sure we honor the commitment to our coal miners, their widows, retirees, for a solid pension that they were promised, for a health care benefit they can depend upon. We are at a critical moment in time. We need to honor that commitment. We are passionate about passing the Coal Miner Protection Act to shore up, to guarantee the promise of a pension and health care. These people put their life on the line. They made our country great. We need to honor that promise. You know, we worked real hard for this piece of legislation, then to be invited to the White House for President Trump's signature. We had coal executives, we had coal advocates, we had coal miners in their hard hats there at the White House, in the Oval Office, surrounding President Trump as he pulls out a pen and signs the Johnson-Jenkins-McKinley legislation that will save 1/3 of all coal jobs in America. What a special moment to be standing there shoulder to shoulder with our coal miners.
You sense it in the room today. You know, I'm sure over the past several years, as the Obama administration's policies have filtered through the coal industry, that they felt a real malaise and a sense of dejection. There's a new sense of optimism now. In fact, you can hear the clapping in the background. It's all about providing the resource to West Virginia and to the world that will frankly power the world and enable growth and opportunity. These are exciting times to be a West Virginia. Over the past several years, I think we've played a part in revitalizing the coal industry in spite of the Obama administration's attack on this industry. But we've put forth several initiatives with the Coal Mines Job and Safety Acts. We've done Part 1 and Part 2 over the last several years. This year we're utilizing Part 3 to help streamline some regulatory environments and to free the coal industry up from the overburdensome regulations so that they can put people back to work and provide that energy resource to the world.
Well, I think what we've seen over the past several years is, have you seen the state legislature and state officials, our attorney general, our congressional delegation, working together to try to stand with coal against the overreach from the Obama administration. Now you're seeing a new president who I think wants to work arm in arm with us in that direction, and I think that has provided a great deal of optimism. What the president has already done just in the first month in office has been encouraging to our energy industry, our coal industry throughout the country, and particularly for West Virginia. So I can understand why there's optimism. Of course, it's going to take a while for us to recover from some of the overreach that we've experienced over the last 8 years. But I do think that we're in the right direction, moving in the right direction, and we're excited to work with those who put our coal miners to work throughout our communities, and I think we're going to see an upturn. We're working on some additional regulation reform in our state that's particularly important. We want to make sure that we have very focused regulations that do protect our individual citizens and protect our environment, but at the same time, we think that there are a lot of regulations out there that just don't make sense, that have just been on books for years, not being looked at. And we want to take a look at those and see if they really serve a purpose. And if they don't, let's not have them become a roadblock and a barrier to putting people back to work in our state. That's our chief goal, is to get people back to work in our state. And I think we can work together to do that over the next 60 days that we're in the legislature and beyond that.
Our work is certainly not done. In fact, my work's not going to be done until I could make sure I kill every job-killing regulation that's unlawful. That's my goal as Attorney General, and I'm not going to flinch from that task. So we've been working very hard over the last 4 years. When I came into office, I said I was going to challenge EPA overreach, and I was going to work my hardest to protect coal mining jobs in the state, and I followed up on that. I'm hopeful that through our big wins in litigation, up at the Supreme Court with the Clean Power Plan, with the Waters United States rule, a national stay, with the Hawks case, which preserves property rights, the people know there's going to be no one as aggressive to protect West Virginia jobs than Patrick Morrissey. We've had that record. But now we have to transition to the new day, where the EPA hopefully will be a real ally and a partner on a lot of these issues. And we could work proactively with them so that when some states, maybe California or New York, file lawsuits against the EPA, if what the EPA is doing is lawful, then we're going to stand up and defend those actions. So I expect that there's still going to be a lot of litigation in my office related to the EPA in the upcoming years, but it just may be on a different side of the V. But that's okay. We're going to continue to work to protect West Virginia jobs. I think that there's an opportunity to do better. Now, the last number of years have been very, very difficult. So I'm not here to say that there's going to be this immediate and massive comeback. But I think if you start to look what happened with metallurgical coal and you start to see that there's an opportunity, even if you get 10, 15, 20% over the course of the next few years, think about the impact in terms of jobs, in terms of severance tax, in terms of optimism for the future. That's certainly sorely needed in West Virginia and across the country, and I'm going to keep going in that direction. I think that's something that gets lost, that these people that talked about eliminating fossil fuels, when coal still will end up being at least 30% or potentially more of the national share of energy that's used. People have to remember that, and coal is a critical part of fulfilling the energy needs of our country, and West Virginia still makes a lot of good, clean coal, and I think there's an opportunity for us to play an important role in supplying our country with the energy it needs over the upcoming years. We've worked to build. We know that when we went into court to challenge the Clean Power Plan, it was my goal to do it with a lot of friends, and there certainly are a lot of groups that are aligned with us, not only the 27 states, Democrats and Republicans, but also labor unions, coal operators, businesses, consumer groups, all joined together, and this actually applied even across the country, not just in coal country, because people knew that that was a regulation that so violated the rule of law. It was one of the most radical regulations that we've seen in our country's history, and I was determined to turn it around, and so were my colleagues. But you do better as a team. And that's why I like to partner up and work and build these coalitions, 27 states, 20 states, 30 states. You win more if you have over half the country on your side. I think that's going to be critical going forward, that we keep those coalitions in place, because we don't want some states on the other side to try to change how our whole country operates because they have a different view of the law. Well, we are really optimistic that we can have communications with the EPA now, and I think West Virginia has a friend in Scott Pruitt, and that's terrific, because one of the problems in the past is that these regulations would be issued coming out of Washington, and we wouldn't have no input into the process. I think there's going to be more of an opportunity to talk and to learn, and I think that allows for the give and take that's good for the states. One of the other big changes that we're going to see is that I think states are going to play an even more important role in dealing with the EPA. You didn't see that. You had more of a top-down approach with the Obama administration. So I'm optimistic that means better days for West Virginia.
Dr. Patrick Moore, he's one of the original founders of Greenpeace. He was one of 6 people who helped start Greenpeace in the basement of a Unitarian church in Vancouver, British Columbia. And their focus was to initially start on nuclear weapons and to prohibit the acceleration of the use of nuclear weapons. So they started Greenpeace, which he advised was green stood for protecting the environment, peace was for protecting humanity and people. So they had a science-based organization that tried to focus on the use of science to protect the environment and to protect people. So for numerous years he was an individual, rode on the Rainbow Warrior boat, attacked whaling ships in the Arctic, just took a very aggressive approach, which I think at the time he'd call himself an extremist. But over time he started to have problems with Greenpeace because they had positions that abandoned science and went more towards ideology. 2 of the big things for him was they were against the use of chlorine. And he thought chlorine is one of the most important elements or compounds on Earth for human health. And he said, well, why are they doing that and wanting millions of people to die? It's just not based by science. Chlorine's good. And other issues where he just said they're of abandoned science in pursuit of the green and the environment, and everything else must take a backseat to Mother Earth. And that their position was ultimately they thought Earth would be better off without human life. And he said it was just too extreme of a position. And the other issue that he said that made him leave was they had what he thought was very reasonable positions. They went to the boardrooms and the companies and the CEOs and the politicians and said, here's what we want. And they were very reasonable requests. And the politicians listened. And the companies listened and gave them what they wanted. So he said at that point they had to make a decision. Do we stop? We won? Do we give up? Or do we have to keep making ever more radical demands to keep ourselves relevant? And he says once you start making those radical demands, you have to become more and more radical and abandon science because the science doesn't support those radical demands. So that's why he left Greenpeace. The way I reached out to him is we just wanted to research what is the real science? What is the science of climate change? And we wanted to go to someone who we couldn't be accused of going to some coal-funded or pro-energy person. So we thought, why not go to the founder of Greenpeace and let him give it to us straight? And he had a very reasonable and rational position that, yes, mining is detrimental to the environment. There is a way to mine coal, keep it sustainable and provide for people, and still protect the environment. So it was a very rational and refreshing point of view from someone who was considered an environmental activist. He pointed to the fact, and I can relate to it, that we were taught in elementary school that CO2 was plant food. It wasn't a pollutant, it was a nutrient. And his position was, and I've tried to research this and verify it, is historically the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere were 7 million parts per million, 7,000 parts per million. It got down to the point it was 180 parts per million. And plant life needs approximately 150 parts per million to even survive. That we were getting dangerously low levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that would affect life on Earth, plant life first, then us. And he says the reason that happens is the oceans are so vast, and the shellfish in the ocean take the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it's in the ocean, they take that carbon and combine it with calcium to form calcium carbonate their shells. And when the shellfish die, that carbon in that shell goes to the bottom of the ocean as sediment. So we're taking carbon out of the carbon cycle, and the levels were going down, 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 and by putting it back in through the use of fossil fuels, we've actually brought a little bit of stability to the global carbon cycle. But his point is optimum levels are 1,000 to 3,000 parts per million. Right now we're at 400. so that instead of us having some doom and gloom scenario of putting carbon in the atmosphere, it's actually a salvation story of protecting us from low levels of carbon. It's an interesting position. 38 computer models that were used to show or predict climate change effect on temperature. All 38 of them are wrong. 36 of them overstated the effects of climate change and the rate of climate change. The interesting point to that is when we hear that the science is settled, the mere fact that there's 38 separate forecasts or calculations telling us what's going to happen proves in and of itself the science isn't settled. Even the people that claim that there is climate change can't agree. And the fact is, if the science was settled, there would be one model, and that one model would correlate directly with the measured data. And that's just not happening. So there's no question the science isn't settled. His position was, and I think it's a reasonable position, is if you're willing to reclaim the land and put it back into the position it was before you mined, what else do you want? I think Dr. Moore said that very succinctly. What else do you want? It's like it was before. You have to mine responsibly. You have to be good stewards of the environment. And as long as you do that, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's his point of the environmental movement, has abandoned all rational thought, and they've gone so extreme just to keep themselves relevant and to raise funds. So that's why putting it back to its normal state, to reclamation the way it was before, isn't good enough. One of the other important factors is in the 70s and 80s, the environmental movement grew and was very respected. And there are a lot of great environmentalists out there. There are people out there who are concerned and rational, but are concerned with protecting the environment. Dr. Moore is one of them. He said, I'm still an environmentalist, I'm just not extreme. He said, it's only the extreme environmentalists that I have the issue with. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the environmental activists, but I think some of them are very, try to be objective, try to be rational, and you can have a conversation. But the extreme fringers are the ones that try to shut down any debate, and the reason is the influx of donations and money to those organizations. And you can see it from our presentation. The environmental movement has grown substantially in their campaign contributions, and some of these charities have revenues, annual revenues of almost $1 billion. They're not the small grassroots organizations that people recall from the 1980s.
About a year ago, the U.S. Department of Energy concluded that the United States was seriously dependent on foreign sources, mainly Chinese sources, for rare earth elements. Rare earth elements are a strategic mineral. They're very heavily used in defense, national security applications, as well as U.S. industry. So the federal government chose to look at specifically coal and coal-related materials as a source of rare earth elements. There had been some preliminary studies suggesting that might be an attractive source. So we submitted a proposal focusing on using acid mine drainage-related materials as our raw feedstock. And that was based on some earlier work that the USGS had done, looking at rare earths, among other things, in some coal mine drainages, and it looked like there might be some potential there. Acid mine drainage probably impairs more miles of streams in the northern Appalachian basin of northern West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio than any other source of pollution. It is our number one stream pollutant. So traditionally, people have looked at that as a liability. Almost all of the acid mine drainage that gets into these streams is from pre-law mining, and those mines simply discharge in an unregulated way and pollute streams. There are a lot of efforts to clean those up. Now, the other side of the coin is the currently mined operations, and those are under what we call Clean Water Act, Section 402 permits, and they are required to treat that water before releasing it to the environment. And what they mainly remove in their treatment process are the metals and the acidity. So what we figured out early on in the game is that the precipitates, the metals that precipitate out in the treatment process, contain all of the rare earth elements that are originating in the acid mine drainage. And if you think about it, acid mine drainage is basically a source of sulfuric acid. It's an acid leaching operation that operates without our help. And it leaches the rare earths out of the surrounding rock, whether that's from an underground mine or a surface mine or a tailings pile, a refuse pile. So it then puts these metals into solution, these 17 rare earths into solution, and then as soon as you raise the pH in the normal treatment process, they drop out along with the iron and the aluminum and the other regulated pollutants. So when we start looking at those sludges, we found that the concentrate, the sludges concentrate rare earth elements above and beyond what you have coming in from the raw water by a factor of 1,500. So it's concentrating them significantly. And then we're also looking at which seams, which mines produce the highest grades of sludge. We call it AMD sludge. And in addition to that, we're measuring the